Pleasant good night to all. We once again welcome you to another HealthWise by the St. Kitts Nevis Medical and Dental Association. I'm your host, Dr. Woodley, and I am also the president of the St. Kitts Nevis and Medical and Dental Association. We are indeed grateful to you, our audience, for inviting us into your homes once again tonight, for inviting us into your space once again. And we are also pleased for the continued support that we continue to get from the public. As many persons have asked me to come back on the show, where have we been? But because of the COVID, we were off here. Last week, my colleague, Dr. O'Loughlin, he kicked off the show with his team. And Dr. O'Loughlin, if you're listening tonight, very pleasant good night to you. Tonight, we will be examining, we will be mincing, not the second wave of coronavirus, and let me tell you, that is fast and coming. But we will be looking at a wave of social injustice, social inequity, which runs parallel to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this encompasses the brutal killing of unarmed men, mainly black men, in the US. Some may say, but Dr. Woodley, what does this have to do with us? But if we sit a while and analyze, we would realize that many of us take flights to said place, many of us have family members in said place, and many of us will be sending our children to these places. So it is only of great interest that we look at this situation and how it affects our lives. Tonight, I have with me three beautiful persons. Two are here with me physically in the flesh, and we have one joining us from the US, that same land that we are speaking about, in the name of Mr. Tau Baptiste. I don't know if we can get him up. Pleasant good night, Mr. Baptiste. It's actually my first time meeting him, and I want to give Dr. Alexander all the kudos for that, because he made this possible. Thank you so much, Dr. Alexander. Mr. Baptiste is a son of the soil. He was born in Bastille, St. Kitts. He is a lecturer of interdisciplinary studies at Gutman College at the City University of New York, and he lives in Harlem. Mr. Baptiste is a lifelong lover of photography, and he uses his portraits to preserve the moment and, in some instances, propel humanity to a positive action. He also uses his portraits to represent the underrepresented Africans throughout the world. He engages in projects from the Bronx to Brazil, and is currently working on his first monograph, Harlem in the Time of Corona. Both of these events run side by side. They are parallel events which affect us greatly. Mr. Baptiste, pleasant good night, and thank you for being part of the show. We have to my right, my immediate right.
Doesn't sound like we're getting his audio.
We have to my immediate right, and she's no stranger to the camera. The other day I turned on One Caribbean News and I saw her. We have Miss Naima Hazel. She's a psychologist. I was shocked when she told me that, but it shows, it comes out in the way she presents herself. She's a mother of two young men, and this is important, a mother of two young men. And as we go on in the show, we would realize the demographics of these brutal killings. She's also a guidance, or she was a guidance counselor, or is a guidance counselor, and she did such work for about 11 years. and she worked in the juvenile justice system for many years as well. Her main work now is NGO development, and she chairs the Advancement of Children Foundation, vice chair at the St. Children's Home Board, and vice chair for the Caribbean Institute for Women in Leadership. Naima, as she told me to call her, very down to earth. Naima, thank you for being here.
Thank you for
And I must highlight that she actually jumped at the opportunity to be a part of this panel. These are the type of persons we want, persons who would jump at the opportunity to educate, persons who would jump at the opportunity to share their experiences, because the only way the generation after us can learn is through our experiences. We have to my left our lovely Doc. Garfield and I, we go way back. Garfield, he is the clinical care coordinator for HIV and AIDS, and he vows and has been a champion for change. I can remember, I doubt if you remember, Dr. Alexander, when we were in Cuba in 1998, I spoke something about my hair, and he said, there is no good or bad hair. I became. He actually alerted in me what it is to be a black person and stop using the term bad hair. Sometimes we don't realize the impact we have on each other, but I always remembered that. And that was some almost 25 years ago. We are getting old. Dr. Alexander is also the DMO, and he's stationed at Mary Child's Hospital. He's also a social activist in his own rights, and many would visit his social media pages where he empowers, uplifts, and propels many young minds and older minds to greatness. He invites dialogue on controversial topics, and we need to get our people involved. We need to get our people talking about the issues. Dr. Alexander, as usual, jumps to the opportunity each time I call for his help. Dr. Garfield, thank you for being here. And as I said earlier tonight, and our topic is Caribbean solidarity with Black Lives Matter. This is a public health crisis. So we're going to start the ball rolling with my guest from the US, Mr. Batiste, as he actually brings some focus to us as it relates to Black Lives Matter. It's in our face. You turn your television on, it's there. I have an 11-year-old who asks about it. In fact, she even researches it. So this means this is something we need to speak to our children about. So Mr. Batiste, can you please give us a rundown on this Black Lives Matter, if it should be all lives matter, and what is your experience as a Caribbean son who actually lives in the US?
Can you hear me clearly? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, right. So, Black Lives Matter. So much has been said, right? To me, there's the movement and there's the energy. And the movement, we know what it is. It's started by 3 black women to highlight just the continual annihilation sometimes of young black men by law enforcement. And so essentially it deals with that, but then there's the bigger issue of black lives mattering just as much as white lives or any other lives, if lives have a color. So to me, it just simply means black lives matter as much as a white life, as a brown life, as rich people's lives, as poor people's lives. But I think that it's been misconstrued by so many who then come up with this all lives matter. And what I see with all lives matter, because of course all lives matter, but what I see with that is it's really a sort of deflation and an attempt to detour. And you see this much when certain movements start to pick up steam, as is this kind of like growing awareness of black folk and black folk speaking out. There's always some group that tries to, kind of take away from the energy and the impetus of a good thing. And so for me, this All Lives Matter has been a way to kind of like not let black people have their moment and not let them have their thing, but to interject and to kind of like try to shut them up by saying all lives matter, right? But of course, we know all lives, the lives of everyone matters. But black folk never said that. Black folk are just saying that our lives matter just as much as everyone else's lives. So, can you hear me?
The Vice President of the United States, he stated, well, he did not want to say Black Lives Matter, and he said all lives matter. And that got some kickbacks. And I do understand you when you say that the black folk wants to put the focus on the black people because this is the demographic that is being affected. But we all must admit, all lives do matter.
I don't agree.
You don't agree?
I don't. It's
okay, great. So we have Naima who's stepping in right now, and this is what I like, because we're here to discuss the issues. Speak to me, Naima.
I think that it's true, all lives matter, but I think the significance of Black Lives Matter is that you never had to say other lives matter before. You've never had to say white lives matter. Everybody knows white lives matter because the entire system is set up to benefit white lives. You don't have to say Asian lives matter because nobody is killing Asians. You don't have to say Indian lives matter because nobody's taking out Indians, you know? But you do have to say Black lives matter because those are the lives that are being disproportionately taken by the systemic discrimination and the abuse of the system. So to me, the all lives matter, I agree with Tao that it's just something that they interjected just to take power away from the Black Lives Matter movement. Because the Black Lives Matter movement doesn't say that other lives don't matter. It's just saying, hey, over here, us black people, we count too. Our lives are just as valuable as yours. And based on American history, their history is set up, the country itself is built on the inequality of blacks as compared to whites. So you do actually have to say that Black Lives Matter because it seems that maybe some people need reminding. And in case they forgot, they just need to, like you said, turn on their TVs or their Twitter or whatever. Because you don't really see, even when people say, oh, they take, police kill white people too, not in the proportion that they're killing blacks, you know. White families are not having to tell their children before when they grow up and you get to the age and they don't have to have the talk with their children. So we have to remind our children that their lives matter as much as everybody else's lives. And now it's, to me, a world movement where people are all saying, okay, you know what, you're right, black people. Your lives actually do matter. So to me, that's how I see that. I don't think that all lives matter is legitimate at all.
So you don't think at this point in time saying all lives matter is legitimate at all?
No, I do not.
Dr. Alexander, what do you think about that?
Yeah. I like how Tao started off. He kind of dissected the BLM or Black Lives Matter into a movement and energy. And I agree with them both, that I think it's a manner of deflecting or deflating. Mm-hmm. Because you have to tap into that energy. You have to reduce some of that energy because people are scared. Mm-hmm. And I sent our piece the other day, the topic of the piece was the hegemonic order of whiteness in our society. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly why persons would criticize you and I and Yaima for having a program about Black Lives Matter, because for them it's fundamentally an issue of the states alone. But whiteness affects all of us. Mm-hmm. That's why during Christmas Carnival, I saw 1 or 2 patients, one with a broken jaw, because police feel, well, you know, our young men shouldn't be going on that bad in the band, even though there is drunkenness, alcohol, music, intoxication of all manner. But yet, you see police now having patience and listening when a white person is being insulting, almost spitting in their face, almost being physically abusive. So there's a different approach for different persons. So I agree that it's a deflection and a deflation of the movement, trying to reduce the energy because people see the energy. This isn't the energy that is now just bordered by the, just contained by the borders of the states. You're seeing this in Japan, you're seeing this in Germany, you're seeing this in Brazil, all of Latin America, all over. It's almost as if it's caught a fire.
It has caught a fire, definitely.
And history has had a way, well, they've had a way of determining and writing our history for us, because these riots have been going on forever. If you trace the history of black Americans in the States, it's been a tumultuous history of always fighting, always picketing, always rioting over these same issues. You go back to Malcolm X, you go even further back to Marcus Mosiah Garvey. It's the same tenets, the same movement, a different energy.
So let me ask you, the Caribbean, where do we fit into all of this? Because I've had some calls before I came here, or some persons told me, but what does this have to do with us? And I tried explaining to them that we live in a world that is no longer huge. We connect, we have flights. I mean, for COVID now, we are at a standstill. But even before COVID, we were flying out. So how do you bring this to us, the Caribbean? We have children. You have your daughter, who is 13, 14. How do you explain to her what does Black Lives Matter mean to her? What is that to her?
Can I say something? Can you hear me?
That is something that is so unique. You would have probably thought that this would have been formed by men who were actually being affected by all of this.
I'm actually
but three ladies, we have the three ladies here. David, can we get the three ladies pictures up? We have Alisa Garcia, we have Patrice Colors, and we have Opal. And these were the three ladies who came up with this. Beautiful ladies, I must admit. So I found that strange that they were the ones who actually started this movement, started this energy. Tao, you being over there, was there a reason? Was something that happened that ladies were the ones who came out and be the forerunners for this movement?
Well, black women carry the strain. Black women carry the strain of the world. Black women mothered the world. And, you know, there's this old saying, which some people say is patriarchal and misogynistic in some ways, but behind every good man, there's a good woman. But then there's another saying, behind every solid man is a solid woman. And so black women, particularly in America, and just even the experience of colonialism, and that long tenure of almost 400 years of colonialism, black women have been the ones to keep the family tight. And so black women have accumulated all these energies over the years, and certainly the energy of caring, but certainly the energy of protecting the pride, protecting the brood. And so to me, it's really natural that black women stepped up in this way. And by the way, black women in America are the single most educated group. I mean, when you want to talk about master's degrees, it will be black women, right? And so black women are supremely in tune in what's happening in the world. And so, you know, they stepped up. And interestingly, I was at an event with, well, she was speaking, but Lisa Gaza was speaking last year. And she's really a very dynamic individual. So I can see how that strength can bubble over. And think of it also as being fed up. You know, there comes a time, as Dr. King says, when the cup runs over, and when it runs over, something has to happen. And I think that these women have been brilliant in terms of, you know, even coming up with a hashtag, given the time that we live in, social media, and how that hashtag can go on to be this thing around the world. I'll come back to America, but I've been working in Brazil for the past 3 years or so on a particular project. And it's interesting to me, since you mentioned the Caribbean. So I'll talk about the Caribbean and Brazil, because what I've been seeing is that we talk about hegemony, but then there's a black hegemony, meaning that black people in America almost seem to rule blackness in the world. People around the world look more and more to black Americans as examples of so-called black excellence. And so you'd be surprised in a place like Brazil, now the talk is vidas negras importam. So that's the Portuguese way of saying black lives are important, black lives matter. And right, think of Brazil as the second largest population of black people outside of Nigeria. So no other country has more black women or women of African descent as Brazil. To put everything in perspective, the United States got 5% of the people taken out of Africa to be enslaved. Brazil got between 45 to 50% of those black people and did not abolish slavery till 1888. So you can imagine the large population of black folk in Brazil, but also black folk suffering police brutality, much more so than in the United States. But in the United States, there is well-documented civil rights movement, a well-documented say it loud, I'm proud. Black power comes out of the United States. Actually, Trinidadian Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, his birthday is actually today. He was the one who coined Black Power. But all the say it loud, I'm proud, Black Power, Black Lives Matter, these are movements that come out of Black Americans who speak loud and act up, and then other black people take that. And then you mentioned proximity. We are all in the Americas, right? The Caribbean is actually considered what? Part of North America. And just the fact that I can be from St. Kitts, but my mother moved here in the 1980s. And just 4 hours and I'm in St. Kitts, right? So in terms of our relationships, they are so close. The world is flat. I mean, our round world has been made flat by technology and by shared injustices. So for someone in St. Kitts to say Black Lives Matter, I would see the positive in that and look at it as a matter of solidarity. Why? In the past 5 years, I know 2 young men from St. Kitts killed, not by cops, but killed here in New York City. So that lets you know the proximity of our realities. And united we stand. And so what happens is that I think that there's this overbubbling of emotion, overbubbling of realities that other people in the world see in Black America. And because Black Americans have given the best voice to these worst situations, I think it's pretty natural for people in St. Kitts who watch American TV. I mean, St. Kitts is practically, we might not like to admit it, but it's a satellite. Like if America is this juggernaut in the world, almost every other place is revolving around America in some ways. And so it's natural that if the pop culture of America becomes second nature in St. Kitts and in the Caribbean because of proximity, blood, and geography, it's also pretty understandable that people in St. Kitts, other than just being bandwagonists, will jump on and say, well, those are my people too, right? I mean, think of your Malcolm X's. Malcolm X, his mother is from Grenada. Farrakhan, his mother is from St. Kitts. Marcus Garvey, I mentioned Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture. So the United States, the Caribbean has always, at least since the 1920s, or we could even go back to the 1800s, but the Caribbean has always infused the United States with energy, and the United States has always infused the Caribbean with energy. So there's a cross-pollination that has happened for as long as we can measure. So I think it's pretty natural that Black folk in St. Kitts will say, you know what, this is my fight too, other than just being bandwagonists. The proximity of brutality is so real. The proximity of emotion is so real. A lot of people in St. Kitts have relatives in the United States. A lot of people in the United States have relatives in St. Kitts, in Grenada, in Trinidad, and we can just go down the list. So it's a pretty natural phenomenon. I don't think that it's just bandwagonism. I think that it's a very real thing. And I think when one suffers or one part of the body suffers, then the whole body has a right to cry out.
What I also want to is that we in the Caribbean, we have a strong connection with the US, whether it be family members there. And that is what I want to underscore tonight. Once we get on that land mass, we become part of the statistics. And we have a slide there. David, if you can get that slide up for me, the fact slide. And that is something very important. Once we get on that piece of land, we become part of the statistics, and we have to behave in a certain manner that we don't become or get caught up in the statistics. As you see there, what David has up, it shows where this gentleman, who we all know by now, and we have seen it on television, where he came from. Blacks are 7 times more often than whites forced to be used on them. It also shows that blacks are 3.5 times more likely than whites to be killed by law enforcement. And it takes 1 in every 1,000 black men, 1 in every 1,000 black men will die at the hands of police. I mean, that is high, that is alarming.
It's more than alarming.
That is something for us to be concerned of. I will be honest, my experience when I go to the US, I don't drive. I don't allow my husband to drive either. Because what we are trying to say here, once you get into America, you become part of that statistics.
Yes.
So you would be that 1 in 1,000 if it happens to you. You are 3.5 times, call it 4 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement. As they say, when you are in Rome, you have to do as the Romans. When you are in the US and those places, as Mr. Baptiste has just said, like Brazil,
yes,
where you have so much brutality geared towards the black men, you have to be careful. These facts are real, and sometimes we may want to downplay it. We have too many topics that are tabooed. We don't want to speak about certain things, but we have to realize what affects in America, people in America, would affect us here in the Caribbean. As somebody rightly says, if America sneezes, the Caribbean catches a flu. And we have...
quite literal right now.
That's quite all the pun intended.
All the pun intended.
And if David, if you show the other slide with Mr. The Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Mr. Hilary McDonald Beckles, he actually shared that same sentiment. We have to stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters up north. As he said, our countries are just south to the deep south countries of the US.
But I actually think it's even more than that. I think that we're looking at it like, oh, we are in solidarity with our brothers and sisters, as if they have challenges that are different. They're different because, of course, I think we forget sometimes in St. Kitts, people always say, you know, I was in Barbados, you know, I do some shows for One Caribbean, and I remember they were doing a show on emancipation, and I had to speak about emancipation. And there's a co-host, he's actually a white man, with the parrot on his shoulder. Don't say anything,
Yes,
Garfield. It's
yes,
very
yes.
irritating to me. But anyway, so, you know, he's it's all right. They know who I am. So, you know, he's got the Joey. He's great, really loves, gets into his history, and he knew everything about Emancipation Day in Barbados. So, you know, this time we went to go film it, and I ended up with the Emancipation Day. And I was like, I don't know anything about this. So they were saying, well, you know, it happens in St. Kitts too. I said, you know, in St. Kitts, we don't really make a big celebration of Emancipation Day like you do in Barbados. He said, why? I said, I don't know, maybe we don't like to be reminded that we were slaves, you know? Now, I know everybody gets really offended when you say it, but I find in St. Kitts we don't touch into that part of our history because we see it as such a negative thing. But the challenge that African Americans have is that they are so, they're transplanted from Africa and they have no idea what their roots are. So if you ask an American where they're from Texas, and he's a black American, where your parents from Texas, and your great-grandparents, they're from Texas. In the Caribbean, we have the privilege of saying, I came from Canada, oh, I'm from St. Kitts. Even if you've never set foot in St. Kitts, if your parents are from St. Kitts, you're from St. Kitts. So in that way, I feel like we should identify with our African brothers and sisters, not so much as us and them, but all of us together. Not to mention, a lot of the issues that they're fighting about are same issues that we have in the Caribbean. So we also need swift access to justice. We also need accountable institutions. We also need to create opportunities for economic power and wealth. We also need education in our schools and our communities that reflect our culture and our history and our contribution. So it's very big of us to be like, oh, we don't have those problems because the police are not stepping on our necks. But we also have a lot of challenges in the Caribbean. We are not even looking at our issues of colorism. You know, colorism is a real issue. There are islands where there are actually people who are non-black people who really control the economic power of those islands in the Caribbean. So I think that we're jumping a bit to say we're so far removed from that. I don't think we're as far removed as we are. I think it's just, as Tao said, the culture is different, and we look at the reflection of the American culture as something that reflects us as all blacks.
Stick a pin in that, Tao. We're gonna come back. We have to pay our bills. So we're gonna take a short break, and then we'll come right back and get into our discussion.
Wonderful.
Covering the cup. No, cup in the ever like that. The coronavirus is bad. So there is one thing we can do. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands.
Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. To keep away the flu, there is one thing we must do. Wash our hands, wash our hands, wash our hands.
Welcome back to HealthWise by the St. Kitts Nevis Medical and Dental Association. We are speaking about Black Lives Matter, the Caribbean standing in solidarity with our brothers in the United States. As my guest to my right said, Naima, is not that we are standing in solidarity. This is something that affects us. We are also experiencing the same injustices, social, political, whatever it may be. So it's actually a fight for all of us. So the movement is an impetus for us to have change, for us to actually do some introspection so that the generation that comes after us should not have to be fighting for this. It is actually painful for me that after 400 odd years of slavery, we are still at this point. This actually feels like the green paper that those people used to use in the deep south in America for their safety. So while I was doing this topic, I came up on something that was very interesting. And it would be an error on my behalf, probably something fatal. I have a black daughter, I have 2 black nephews, we have black children. Not to teach them the tricks of not being killed in the event that they happen to be anywhere. And I came upon a video that was really interesting. It was very touching. Just get home safely. Things that you should do that would minimize you being that 1 in 1,000 men to be killed by law enforcement. Things you have to do so that you do not become the 3.5 person who is most likely to be killed by the police. So can we have that video? It's just about 1 minute, but that video was very impactful. It teaches our children who are black, we are black people, how to behave. It's also sad that while other racial groups will be teaching their children how to make money, how to be educated, we have to teach our children that basic, almost jungle-like.
Not to get killed.
Yeah, how not to be killed. Let us have a look at that video, please.
10 rules.
10 rules.
10 rules.
10 rules of survival.
10 rules of survival if stopped by the police.
Number 1, be polite and respectful when stopped by the police.
Be polite.
Be respectful.
Remember that your goal is to get home safely.
Your goal is to get home safely.
Your goal is to get home safely. I'm sorry.
Number 2, if you feel your rights have been violated, you and your parents have a right to file a formal complaint with your local police jurisdiction.
Number 3, do not, under any circumstances, get in an argument with the police.
Number 4, always remember that anything you say or do can be used against you in court.
Number 5, keep your hands in plain sight.
Make sure the police can see your hands at all times.
Number 6, avoid physical contact with police officers. Do not make any sudden movements and keep your hands out of your pockets.
Number 7,
Do not.
Do not.
Do not, do not, do not, do not.
Do not run, even if you are afraid.
If you're afraid.
Number 8, even if you believe you are innocent, do not resist arrest.
Number 9, if you are arrested, do not make any statements about the incident until you are able to meet with a lawyer or public defender.
Number 10, stay calm and remain in control.
Watch your words. Watch your body language.
Watch your emotions. Remember.
Remember, your goal is to get home safely.
Get home safely.
Dr. Alexander, what do you think about that video, those 10 rules of getting home safely?
Absolutely ridiculous. I found it was heart-wrenching that somebody had to create a video to give us 101 rules about not getting killed by persons who've been commissioned to take care of us. It's absolute nonsense, you know why? Because the persons who've not resisted arrest, put up their hands, been arrested, not arrested, but taken into police custody and die in police custody from a beating. So it doesn't matter what you do once a system is tweaked against you. It doesn't matter what you do if it's institutionalized racism where police feel like they themselves are at threat. Because I spoke earlier about the hegemonic order of whiteness. If you have a police force that thinks that these persons are monsters, and we've had policemen with body cams on, taped, mentioning phrases like that, where we're going out to hunt these guys now. That's because they think that we're animals. So either they're not sufficiently trained, they've been brought up in racist homes, but how do they end up protecting us if they're racist? Because I think with any psych evaluation, you could pull out 9 out of 10. You might have one that could be clandestine. But I'm telling you, why do we need to have a video? Why do I need to go through that with my son or daughter in 2020? This isn't 50 years ago. This isn't the time of Malcolm X, not the time of Marcus Garvey.
Let me ask Mr. Baptiste, do you use these rules, these 10 rules, or I would imagine they have more? I saw Trevor Noah, the famous comedian. He said when he gets pulled over, he just puts his hand out of the vehicle so that they can see he has nothing. So Mr. Baptiste, do you go out every day consciously thinking, hey, I can be that 1 in 1,000. I am 3 times more likely to be shot at. And do you practice these rules?
I mean, personally, I don't focus in that way. but a lot of people have to tell their sons these things, right? And I'm aware of how certain people might read me in the world. I'm aware how certain cops, white cops, might read me, but my interaction with them is always like man to man, eye to eye, cool and calm, and I'm a man and you're going to take me as that. And that has been my interaction with them. But unfortunately, for a lot of people, that's not enough sometimes. Many people have had to tell their sons. There's actually a video, I think it came out on YouTube or Instagram a few days ago. A young black kid is shooting hoops in his driveway, and suddenly he kind of like gets flat behind his SUV, the SUV in his driveway. And it's because the cops are driving by. And as the cops pass by, then he goes back to shooting. But that basic survival instinct is something that a lot of black men know that they've had to employ in America for hundreds of years. And it's really sad that we must teach a lot of these techniques to our children. What strikes me in that video is the notion, and you guys might have heard of what is called respectability politics, right? The idea that if you present yourself as more respectable, then law enforcement, and indeed certain white folk, will respect you more, right? So if you dress a certain way, if you pull your pants up, if you speak the best English, if you're not loud and super animated, as the stereotype of black folks goes, then, you know, white people and particularly cops will respect you more. And that just has not been the case for a lot of people. You know, it seems a lot of times that a lot of black people have to work that much harder to just have regularity, if you understand what I'm saying. So all this teaching children is to just so that they can have a semblance of regularity. But when you have to prepare children for what is essentially warfare and kind of like war tactics and strategies, then does that child really get to be a child and maximize on childhood? And so growing up black in many areas in the United States is fraught with these sorts of realities that come and steal childhood.
About those rules.
Those rules kind of remind me, like, I think that people look at it and they go, oh, that doesn't apply. But think if it was like a woman. That ad reminds me, like, if it was a woman and it was saying, okay, so you don't get sexually assaulted, don't wear short skirts. Don't stand too close to a man. Don't be too kind. Don't use these words. That's what it comes like to me. Like he was saying, the respectability politics, and Dr. Gupta was saying, it doesn't really matter what you do. They do have to use those rules because it does limit their chances. It doesn't protect them, but it does limit their chances of encountering and having a negative experience with the police, but it doesn't guarantee. And I think that even though it's important to teach your kids that the idea that that's become so normalized in the society, like this is like a thing that you do when your kids get to a certain age, you have to teach you how not to get killed, to me is very problematic. And also comes to where you were talking earlier about the public health issue of stress. Because if you think about it, you were saying it doesn't really affect the women, but it does. That's their sons. There's also women that get killed. Right. And think about the psychological and the physiological effects of stress. And how then, when we're looking at even the COVID numbers in America, think of how it's affecting disproportionately black people. We just assume because they have comorbid physical challenges, but really some of it is stress. Because imagine the stress of having to go through your whole life learning and living and existing, even though you've done everything in the way you were supposed to do, everything like everybody else, you still have to go through life with this fear of being discriminated against or being harmed based on the color of your skin. And there's a lot of studies that have shown that the psychological effect of stress, of racism and stress, is really affecting black people's more like health and morbidity rates. So I think that we have to look at it in terms of that, especially as it relates back to COVID and how we see that COVID is disproportionately affecting people of color.
I agree.
And part of it has to do with also with the first question that we had at the beginning about why this whole movement was started by women. And they even lean towards it, about that respectability politics. I remember one young lady telling me that she actually has to map her trajectory from school to home. And I'm like, why? And she was like, you know, because certain streets gonna have on them drunken men at a certain time, they're gonna be harassing her, they're doing a construction on that side, so more than likely they're gonna have men there. And women navigate that space every single day of their lives. From the time they pass through puberty, they have to cross the leg a certain way, dress a certain way. So it was very easy for black women to identify with the struggle of respectability politics and knowing what to do and when to do and how to do it, and them being mothers. Because remember, no matter what you do, you could be, your son could be age 35, what he does still reflects on you as a mother. Some reason it can be taken back to his childhood and something that the mother did wrong. So women need to empathize a lot more. Women have to think of the group, the family, the community a lot more than us men. Like one feminist friend said to me once, you've never had to think about rape. The only time you, Garfield, have to think about rape is if you go jail. And I was like, whoa. She says, from the time we're little girls and we can understand, we're taught to avoid rape.
That's true.
As if it's our fault.
That is so true. The numbers to call are 466-2626, sorry, 466-2666, or 662-8674, or 767-4765, and our overseas number is 1-239-645-4500. These are the numbers to call. We do invite persons to call in, give us your thoughts, give us recommendations. Remember, this world is small. We may not go there, but we may come in contact with persons with those same ideologies. We need to protect our young ones. As sad as it is, those rules are useful to minimize the causes of death. David, can I get the slide with both arms up? Because this gentleman, I would assumed, he got home safely.
He did.
So I think he probably followed all the rules because he got home safely. And this gentleman, a St. Lucian, and this hit home because my daughter is St. Lucian, my husband is St. Lucian. My husband actually knows his mother, who was a PS in St. Lucian.
Oh, wow.
This gentleman was home, sitting on his couch, eating ice cream, I think, and he was shot and killed. So we do all the rules. He got home safely, and he still ended up dead. What more? What next? What must we do? So these are the hard questions we have to answer. This is the talk we need to have with our children. So Naima, as the psychologist, how early is too early, or is it too early to speak to our kids about this, about racism? Because I have an 11-year-old and I don't want to poison her mind.
But you know,
I don't know. What do I do?
Well, start without the hate. Start with the love. Like, so for me, as a psychologist, I mostly work with young people, and a lot of them have a lot of questions. They're angry. They don't understand. They've never really had to deal with race politics so much. You know, they've been living very comfortably in their world of TikTok and IG and not Facebook, because young people don't go on Facebook, but TikTok and IG and so on and so forth. They never really thought about it. Now they're really affected. And what I found has been effective is talking to them about the things in their culture that they should be proud of. Because there's a systemic system, there's a system that's set up to teach them not to be proud of their culture, to teach them that the things that they hear and they believe in the systems that's set up is a fair system, like somehow they're less than. So I think in starting with our children, we don't have to start with the fear, or you should be afraid of, especially in the Caribbean. Where we need to start in the Caribbean is teaching our children what we should be loving about ourselves, the actual contribution that we've made, the contribution that blacks have made. You know, you don't know that, you know, black people invented insulin, you know, the light bulb, you know, the traffic light that you go to even though we only have 3. It's okay, we'll take it. You know, we invented that too. They don't even know the history of their own culture. And I remember growing up, because I grew up a lot in North America. I didn't come to St. Kitts to live until I was a teenager. And when I grew up in North America, I remember being really shocked when I finally started to learn black history, because I'm thinking, I went to school here my whole life. How did I miss this history? When I'm learning history, they're not saying it's white history, they're saying it's history. So are you saying that my history is not part of the history? So I think we have to begin by educating our children about loving themselves and loving our history and our connection to Africa, and not feeling like we're ashamed like those Africans. And no, you're African too. And it's actually a culture to be proud of. It's not kids starving on TV or people stealing or asking you from princes to bring you some money. It's actually a culture that you should be and can be proud of. So I think that's where we start with our children. And then also opening up the honest dialogue. We have to let our children talk to us and not shut them down with, we tend to be, in St. Kitts, we love truth but no grace. So, somebody will come to you and they say, oh, but that's trepidation talking, but no grace. We have to give our children the truth with grace. Grace, truth without grace is mean. Just like grace without truth, grace with truth is meaningful, and truth without grace is just mean. And we need to stop being so mean when we speak about our brothers and sisters. That's not our problem. Oh, and even how we speak about each other in our own homes. When I first moved to St. Kitts, it's the first I ever heard black children making fun of other black children. Oh, you're so black. Lord, you're black like this and you're black like that and your teeth are so yellow. I'd never experienced that before. And I moved to St. Kitts with my children so that I wouldn't have to experience that. So I wouldn't have to worry about my kids being called a nigger or anybody treating them differently because of their color. Because even in Canada, there is racism. It is just much more polite than in the US. So I moved them here, it's much more polite. So I moved them so we wouldn't have to experience that. So for me, we have to start speaking to our children honestly, opening up dialogue and letting them speak, because the children have a lot of feelings about what's going on in the world, and a lot of the times we don't really acknowledge that our young people are experiencing this live through social media and how it's affecting them.
Point taken. Somehow I think we are embarrassed to speak about blackness. I sometimes get that, as if we don't want to offend anybody.
It's not by accident.
I think it was, yes, by design. Because I didn't get that from my parents. I don't know if because we grew up in a black environment that they didn't see the need to emphasize your blackness and speak about it. But I never had that. I mean, I have the open conversations with my daughter about you being black, you being beautiful, your color doesn't limit you. But those talks, I don't know if Garfield, if you got them. I didn't get those talks. Tau, I don't know if you got those talks while you were growing up. But that was never something that was spoken about around the dinner table.
Well, for me, it wasn't. It was implied a lot. But there was also that counterproductiveness, such as, well, your hair looks so, you gotta cut your hair this week, I'll go to the barber. So there was that, what I termed then as manifestations of self-hate. But for me, what was core is growing up during what I think was the fruitfulness of Rastafarianism and having Rastas within the community around me that was giving me that counter message. That all of us were from greatness and we're from Africa, and I could see the militancy and I could see the rebellious nature in them, that they were fighting against the comb and the scissors. Things which were paramount for everybody else in the society. So I saw people that were downtrodden and people who were outcast and marginalized, reflecting everything that was me and saying it was beautiful. So at that point I wasn't on a conscious level where I could, eat it, digest it, and see for what it is, but it definitely impacted me. So I wasn't getting it core in the home, but definitely was there, and it resided in the community, and it was around me, especially through Rasta.
Okay, don't forget the numbers to call are 466-2666, 662-8674, 767-4765, and the overseas number is 1-239-645-4500. Tao, this is for you. In the marches that we are seeing, I'm seeing a lot of persons of different color. I saw some activists from the 1970s who were making a comparison, and they said that, back then it was predominantly black, but now they're seeing white, different colors coming to this march. What do you think of this? Your other colleagues in the US, how do they take this? Some persons say they're just piggybacking, they just want to be part of the hype. What are your thoughts on this?
Some people have said that. Once again, the notion of the bandwagonist. Are these people just on a bandwagon? But what I found in being out there on the street, is that a lot of the people who are protesting are young whites. So I'm talking about teenagers right up through maybe early mid 30s. And I think that a lot of these younger whites, I think that a lot of them genuinely want to make some changes in the world. I think that there are people who want to overthrow the old systems, to dismantle the old systems, and there are a lot of white folk who genuinely are close and have black friends and black co-workers. And I believe that there's an honesty in that. I wouldn't dismiss that there's a bandwagonist element, and it might be in some cases, some people argue, well, maybe it's just for some people to feel good about themselves, kind of like this virtue signaling. You signal that you're virtuous, right? But I genuinely believe that there are a lot of white people who are tired of it because it affects everybody's lives. And particularly, I live in New York City, but black and white people live right next to each other. More so, I often say New York City is not the rest of the United States, but more so than in some spaces. And I have lots of white colleagues. I mean, in academia, in fact, most of them are white. And I know how this thing has reverberated through the university, and particularly at my school, and all the talks that are going on right now. And how can we have genuine change? And I mean, what I bring to this argument is that let's have some actionable items. We don't want lip service. Quit the talking and let's lay out a list of 3 things that you can do. So if you're this professor, how can you restructure the canon? Maybe you should throw out some Shakespeare and bring in some more Baldwin or some Toni Morrison. And so little things like that. But certainly on the street, I think that a lot of young people are really fed up with this. Personally, my older daughter is 16 years old. She goes to a private school. I could not pay for that. It's more expensive than Harvard, but she's there on academic scholarship. And she's one of the few black brown people in that school. She's also the president of Black Girls Rock chapter at her school. So she's very vocal. She's quiet, but she's vocal about a lot of things. And most of her friends are white. And the way I see them coming together, like expressing a profound disgust for what their black friend might have to deal with, but also just the nonsense of how racism persists on this level and how a black person is not respected as a full human being. I think that there's a lot of white people who are tired of that. It's affecting everyone. I can't speak for everyone, but I do think that there are a lot of white people who are fundamentally fed up with it. Working on my own projects, because I started a new project, Harlem, in the time of Corona, and a lot of white people live in Harlem. So I photograph white people. And sometimes even before I begin the interview process, just last week, photographed the lady on her step. And before we got into talking about COVID, she just started bawling. And I was like, what's going on with you? And she said, how do you feel about all this other pandemic, which is a longer running pandemic than COVID? But, the anti-black racism, because let's call it what it is, that's what it is. Anti-black racism, thinking black people are less, and so you can do whatever you want with their lives. She said she's fundamentally fed up with it. And I said, well, what can you do as a white person? She's an educator. I said, well, go to the Board of Ed and start restructuring. Introduce some texts that respect black folk and brown folk, that show them as human beings. That's what you start doing, other than just holding up a sign, other than just marching. Yes, bodies underground are necessary. Back to even civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King, he had lots of white allies. So it cannot take full effect unless you have genuine allies. And a lot of these white people are genuine allies. So I think that we should recognize some of them as such and do our research, but certainly vet. But if we can have allies on multiple sides, and those allies are genuine, then accept them and move forward.
You had a call?
Hi, we have a call. Caller, you're on the air. Hi, good night.
No, not there.
It seems as if we may have missed that caller. Can I get the slide up with public health crisis? Because this is part of the whole topic. Is it a public health crisis? And we have 4 tick boxes there, and we're going to go through them to see if what is happening to our black men in North and in Brazil and around the world, if it actually fits a public health crisis. So Naima, it says, let's go, it places a large burden on society that continues to increase.
Of course.
Yes,
Check.
absolutely. Check.
Impacts certain parts of the population more than others.
That's why Black Lives Matter.
There's evidence that preventative strategies could help.
Hell yeah.
And the last one, evidence shows that such preventative strategies are not yet in place.
That is absolutely true.
We have a caller. Caller, you're on the air. Good night. Hello. While we wait on that call, so this is from the CDC, this checklist about what is a public health crisis. And if we place what is happening to our black men, it ticks all the boxes are ticked.
Yes.
So I understand why some associations, and if you go down, David, to the other slide, why some associations have grouped this racism, which is linked to the killing of black men, as a public health crisis.
Yes.
So now we can see the link between this. Hi, caller, you on the air. Good night.
Hi, good night. Just turn on the program. I think it's a very interesting program. My good friend Valden. Yeah, this is Inspector Greer.
Oh. Hi, good night.
Good night, yeah. My question. That persons get emotional, and that is why these white cops are being charged for murder or other bodily harm. And when you have to go before the court, it's about black and white. And the judicial system, the adjudicator of the matter, all you look at the use of force policy and these white cops walk. So my question is, how one can effect change in the use of force policy of those.
Okay, it seems as if the caller
got disconnected.
But his question is valid.
One of the things I've seen.
Hello?
Okay, you're still there. Okay, continue. You are cut off for a brief moment. Hello?
Hello, I'm still here.
Yes. Were you finished or you want to complete your thought?
Yeah, I wanted to know his response, and depends on his response, I might continue.
Okay, thank you. You can listen off here now. Okay, Alexander?
Oh, it was me or it was Tao?
Oh, wait, okay, Tao?
It was Valden, yeah.
Oh, that's his name, Valden.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Tao. Both of us work in history.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Baptiste, you were listening?
His audio cut out for a while. Can you sum up what he asked, please?
So force policies used by lots of the police forces in the states. You think it's not properly structured. So usually in court, people get emotional. They could see it's pretty much a racist, a racial attack, a racially fueled attack. But when it comes down to the use of force, the police and their defense are always able to show that their use of force was justified, and they walk.
About racism in America, we talk about it being systemic, right? So we have systems that have, for a long time, preferred the voices of the cops and not listened enough to the voices of the people being brutalized by cops. You cut out, so there's a lot that I didn't hear, but what I would say is that systemic changes, and these are deep-rooted, these need to start happening. One example, I think a certain kind of chokehold was just banned in New York City. Like the governor put that on the books, and it's not, since I think last week, that is banned. And so imagine that you have all these little loopholes in place that allows law enforcement to be, and when I say law enforcement, but also, I guess, the justice system, if we can call it that. But it allows these systems to kind of just like chew black men up and chew black people up and spit them out, sometimes in the face of overwhelming evidence. And a lot of times you'll associate this sort of procedure with what the South, the segregated South 50, 60, 100 years ago, but a lot of it is still very prevalent. I mean, the United States justice system swallows up more black men than any other group of or race of men. So go figure. Once again, it goes back to that systemic racism, that anti-black racism that doesn't really respect black lives. And that's why we come back around to Black Lives Matter, right? And so hopefully I answered. I couldn't hear much of what was said. Let me know.
That was basically what he was trying to ask, that new policies have to come in place.
Right.
That is what the marches are supposed to actually cause. We have a next caller? Okay. Okay, we have lost that call.
And there's a lot of defund the police movement.
And there was, yes, the defund the police movement as well.
There's also, I saw one blogger online that was pushing, actually suing the insurance companies that cover the police.
Oh.
Yeah. Because all these insurance companies would have stipulations in terms of police brutality. What are your policies to prevent or mitigate police brutality? If you have...
Doctor, we have the caller. Caller, good night. You are on the air.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening. Pleasant good night.
First and foremost, I want to say this is an excellent discussion.
Thank you.
And a great set of topics. Good night, Doc, and good night to Tahu and Hazel. You guys we have crossed back. Calling from the US Virgin Islands, this is Darren Bogle Stevens.
Oh, nice to have you.
Black Lives Matter, I think, is a very interesting and a very well-needed organization and movement. And I do get disturbed when I hear the people from the Caribbean trying to separate us from those people in the States. We do have the same issues. We have family members there. Sometimes we as professionals, we cross-train with individuals from the States. Me as a law enforcement officer at some point in time, I might have to, again, cross-train with an officer from the States, and I might be up there and run into situations like this. We travel to Miami and New York and all these places for carnivals. It only takes the blink of an eye, leaving from the airport, going to your hotel, going to a jam. Some of us leave from the Caribbean, go to Miami to get the cruise ship. So you, at some point in time, you're going to interact, whether you're going to Disney. So yes, there's a connection, and we need to put away the ignorance that there is no connection. But one of the things I think that we need to look at as a people is fixing ourselves. You understand, as a people, because let us not do things that the white people don't watch us and see the way how we are behaving amongst each other, and then use that as a stepping stone to come at us, saying like, well, hey, they talk about Black Lives Matter, but they don't take care of each other. They're fighting down one another. And these are things that we need to fix as a people. You know, as an individual sitting here, and I'm sure other people could relate to what I'm saying. There's racism within, or you want to call it segregation, whatever, hate within ourselves as a people. And I could think of myself being from McKnight, where people scar me from being from McKnight. People scar me because of who I hang around and who my brother is. Then, you know, travel to the Virgin Islands, and then I get scarred and called an alien. You know, then I decided to wear my nappy, and I get scarred as a laughter. Then I decided to join law enforcement. I get scarred for joining law enforcement. Then I decided to run for political office. And you know, all these things happen amongst us as a people. So we have to change that. We have to change that. You understand? And one of the things we got to change also is, of course, our education curriculum as a people. All right? We have to start to change that. We have to start to educate our children that they are worth something and what we did and what they can do with what we did and what those who went on did with the foundation that they did. We cannot be teaching our children anymore that the cow jumped over the moon and the little and Jack and children up the hill. You know, these are things that they taught us that we shouldn't have learned. When our brains were sponging in that era, we were supposed to be learning about the stock market and checks and balances and good credit and bad credit. And these things would have been embedded in us up to now, like up to now I can't forget about the cow jump over the moon. You know, so these are the things that we as a people, we have to change. We must. And we must also hold these elected officials accountable, because it's through legislation, things when it comes to police brutality is going to change. They have to hold these police officers accountable for their wrongdoing. When they start to life sentences and get penalty at them and take away their houses and stuff like that, then you're going to see them stop doing this nonsense. It's going to deter them somewhere. Just like how they want to deter us from doing something. We shouldn't have to bow down when we are right. We shouldn't have to. So again, I enjoy the conversation and the topic. I full joy. I full joy the conversation and topic. And I appreciate what you guys have done tonight, bringing it from all different corners of the world. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you for calling. At this point, we will take a break. But I want to piggyback on something the caller said, but I will do so after the break.
Since graduating from college, saving has been very difficult for me. Having to pay my student and vehicle loans and hire purchases made owning my home a fantasy. So, when I heard about the National Grad Home Mortgage, I was excited and relieved, because the National Grad Home Mortgage consolidated all my consumer debts, plus, most importantly, providing funding to build my dream house with one monthly payment. Thank you, National Bank.
Visit any of our National Bank branches for more details about our National Grad Home Mortgage. When you bank at National, you invest in your future.
Cover your cough. No, cough in the air like this. The coronavirus is bad. So there is one thing we can do. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands.
Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. To keep away the flu, there is one thing we must do. Wash our hands, wash our hands, wash our hands.
Hi, good night, and welcome back to HealthWise by the St. Kitts Nevis and the Medical and Dental Association. We're actually doing tonight, if you're just tuning in, we're doing Caribbean Solidarity with Black Lives Matter. Is it a public health crisis? And we went through the CDC definition of what a public health crisis is, and we were able to take all four. Okay, we have a call on the line. Caller, we are listening to you. Good night. Thank you for calling.
Yes, good evening.
Hi, good evening, sir.
This is a voice from the wilderness. And the children should learn of their culture from a young age. For there is no stem, leaves, nor branches without roots.
Amen.
Parents as well must let the children know, and they themselves must appreciate their blackness. Too often you have individuals that bleach their skin, put weaves and fake hair in their hair. Not that I am diametrically opposed, but it's what society teaches them, that their hair is no good. And if you review the struggle that black people have encountered, we have always had to struggle. And to this day, the new generation are quite different compared to the previous one, who marched with passive resistance, and 50 years later, nothing was achieved. And if anything is to be achieved, all black people globally must appreciate their culture, embrace their hair, embrace their skin, and love themselves. If you ask most people, tell me a few things that you like, they may say, this food, that music, but very few people would say that they love themselves. Now, not as a narcissist, but to love yourself is very important. For by loving yourself, then you see yourself equal to others. You see yourself as a human being, and the society in general must appreciate black people for the work that we have done. We have built the cities, and our pay was the whip. And then when slavery was abolished, it was so hard to find a job that we became indentured servants, a sophisticated slave. And then after slavery, mentally, we have not recovered because we are still mentally enslaved, most people. So for all the generations throughout the world, educate the children of their culture, teach them of their history, and stand in solidarity.
Thank you so much, caller. I must say your voice is so calming. I totally enjoyed that. It was like
I thought I was the
like
only one
yoga.
thinking it.
Do we have another call? Right. Hello, caller. You are here with us. Good night. Thanks for calling. Okay, while that caller reconnects with us, one of our, hello? Okay, one of the callers said that we have to heal ourselves, and before we can make any change, we have to heal ourselves. We have to stop the fight down among ourselves. And I have to be honest, when I came home, some days I felt like wearing an I Matter shirt to work. No, I felt like wearing a shirt like that to work. Because I felt so marginalized at times. Okay? I felt so marginalized at times that I wondered, but where am I? I am home with my black people. I'm a daughter of the soil. And I was made to feel less than. You are not needed. In fact, I was told I am not needed. So that caller made a really, really good point. We have to fix ourselves. And when people see that your house is in order, they tend to respect you. So I have to be honest, some days I felt like that, wearing a joy matter to St. Kitts, because persons don't respect you. They look at you as being inferior. They use certain factors to marginalize you, whether you're female, you came from a certain school, you're not from a particular family. They don't want to include you. And one of the social determinants of good health is social inclusion.
Yes.
And I find we often go to the opposite end of the spectrum and do social exclusion.
Yes, we do.
And this is something we have to call out. We have to stop it. We have to stop excluding people and become a society where we include everybody. Tao, I heard you have something to say, some input?
Well, a lot to say actually, but I didn't know if we room tonight. But to the first call and then to the second, I kind of felt that the conversation would go in the direction of, do we matter to ourselves, right? And so he mentioned just the ways we can treat each other sometimes. But what I'll submit, in the ways we treat each other, that too is systemic. It goes back many, many years, and that will touch on the point of the last caller. But think of how, I'll give you the notion. Rudyard Kipling, I think he wrote the Jungle Book. I think he had said this some time back, but essentially the black man is half animal, half beast, right? In other spheres, there's this infantilization of the black man, like the black person is not mature enough ultimately to take care of himself or herself. And these are systems that were set in place during slavery, and then certainly through the colonial era. So to bring us to the modern, and the gist of my work is we work on a decolonizing of the mind. What do we mean by that? We mean we overthrow a lot of the ideas that have been put into our minds multi-generationally. So when you go back and you talk about hair and hair texture and these kinds of things, and skin color, I mean, all of these are, proximity to whiteness. So when we talk about anti-blackness, then of course we have to talk about whiteness and what whiteness is. But to be brief, why do a lot of black folk suffer from these so-called systems? Well, intergenerational, so it's been going on for 300 plus years. And if your grandmother, whom you love dearly, and she say, well, you're too black, or your hair is too picky, if she would say that and she was someone who loved you, how are you supposed to develop a healthy self-esteem? Right? If someone who loves you tells you that, but then that someone who loved you was brutalized by a system, mentally brutalized by a system. And so what we have is, I think Dr. Joy DeGroy calls it PTSS, post-slavery traumatic syndrome, PTSD, right? So in psychology, we know of PTSD, but think of what a lot of black folk, not just in America, but certainly in St. Kitts, and maybe to a lesser degree in St. Kitts, but we're talking about a collective black experience, a colonial and a post-colonial experience. A lot of black folk have internalized that their lives don't matter as much, right? To themselves sometimes. And so that's a work that definitely has to be done. You do that work at home. Yes, we need to make systemic changes in the bigger system, but we have some systems called homes, right? And if we can do some work on that level with our children, then they start to approach the world as princes, princesses, kings, queens, and comportment does a lot. Yes, comportment then leads into, the way you carry yourself leads into, like, will the cops treat you differently? Will other people treat you differently? That might be the big idea of Black Lives Matter, but what I'm getting from both callers is that we must value ourselves in a certain way, live it, project it, enculturate it in our children, enculturate it over and over again, and at least in that way we'll prepare them for the roughness of the world. We'll prepare them for the roughness of an in many cases, an anti-black racist world. If you give them the fair expectation that this is how powerful you are, but this is what the world will try to bring at you, it will do wonders for our mental health collectively. You asked me earlier about my experience, and I said that when I step out, I know what exists in this society. But if I'm dealing with a cop or any white person in authority, I'm a full man. They can only see me as such. That is my mentality. That is my dealing with them. So we have to look at some very deep-seated self-esteem work, and a lot of it begins at home. But I'm with the last caller, in saying that we must bring these ideas to our children. We must decolonize their minds. There's post-colonial thought, and there's also decolonial thought, which means we have to do the work to get rid of some of the things that exist in our minds that are not helpful to us.
Mr. Baptiste, you're getting some real big up on Facebook, and at this point in time, we want to thank those who are viewing via Facebook and leaving some very positive comments. This exactly was the objective of this panel discussion tonight, to bring awareness. And sometimes because we cannot see mental health issues, we tend to push it under the rug. But something like this that affects our black men affects us mentally. We had a great time. Time is running out on us. We're actually going to wrap up now. So I'm going to allow my panelists to actually give their final thoughts. And this is not the end of us, So Dr. Garfield, Naima, Tau, nice meeting you. This is not the end. This is just, opening up, because we have to come back with more. So just do a quick wrap up, after which we would close the show with a video where we see support for Black Lives Matter around the world. It has gone international, even here in St. Kitts. If you show that slide, even here in St. Kitts, we had a march on the 3rd of June, Wednesday. That was a Wednesday on the 3rd of June. I was so elated, and it's my daughter, my 11-year-old, who pulled it up and said, hey, mommy, they're having a march. Are you going? But she told me 5 minutes before. So we're going to let the panelists close and give their final thoughts. Naima?
Oh, I get to go first. Garfield, you started, I end. I'm happy to be here this evening. I think that this is a really important topic, and I'm glad that we're seeing it as a public health and especially mental health issue. As I was trying to highlight before in terms of stress, our brother Tao actually was talking about, I think he talked about PTSD, and there is of course race-related PTSD, and it's actually known to be more detrimental than regular psychological distress. And so I think that that's something that we have to also be looking at. But what I think I got out of the last discussion, and the last comments from Tao, which where I'd like to focus, is the home. And I think that when people are calling in and talking about us being responsible for ourselves, maybe you don't identify with the movement, maybe you don't see how you connect to North America, even though we've really tried to give you some really good arguments, but you do know how you connect to the children in your home and your other family members and the people in your community and how we relate to each other. And I think that a good place for us to start the healing for ourselves, not looking at others and thinking how much better we're doing, is to start to look at ourselves and begin the healing here at home.
Thank you so much. Dr. Garfield?
The last caller still has, his words still have me rambling, but just before I get into that, Professor Tao, for the next Skype or Zoom video that we have, he's gonna have to take all those hats.
I love them.
They're distracting me, man. But the car spoke about sweeping your own yard, and I just want to highlight a few things there. And he spoke, well, he didn't mention that term, but we like to use that term of crab in the barrel syndrome and us black people pulling down each other. But crabs really don't belong in a barrel. Crabs have the individual homes where they live with their mates and they reproduce, and they live good just like that. When you put them in a barrel, that's what happens. So a lot of people identify blackness and self-love and black love and think somehow that weave and makeup, or women wearing weave and makeup somehow goes in contra of that, and it's not so. Women could wear weaves and be black conscious. Women could wear lots of makeup and be black conscious. No man is supposed to determine how much of makeup a woman is supposed to wear, or identifying or measuring her blackness, determining that. How we start to build self-love is about including that into our education, in our culture, in our homes, rather than looking at the superficialities of blackness. Because it ain't just about a look, it's about a movement, it's about a culture, it's about a consciousness, it's about energy.
Like you said.
Right? So, and I think he didn't use the term again, but he kind of spoke about us looking at ourselves and how we behave. And I'm wary of that performance that we feel that we need to have for whiteness. Like, even with my daughter, sometimes I get enraged watching certain movies and she doesn't identify with that. Because she didn't live the life I lived. She hasn't read the books I've read. And she now has white friends, Oriental friends, who don't exhibit any form of racism to her, so she doesn't understand how this works. So we have to be careful, this present generation with the future generation, because race relations won't be the same for them. And that's something that we have to identify with. Yes. That's why I could understand how some persons would say Black Lives Matter in St. Kitts. That has nothing to do with us, because they're not impacted by it. We also have to look on the other side of the coin, that I've seen a lot of white persons, genuine, well-meaning white persons, who genuinely just don't know what's going on. I saw one young man who said, why did I have to wait on a black blogger on black Instagram to tell me about race relations? Because it was never discussed in his home. When we look back at our history, we have to understand that slavery was built on the backs of black persons. In fact, it was so amazing that if you trace the history, when slavery was ended, these guys that owned the cane and the previous owners of the slaves were bankrupt. They didn't have any money, so a lot of them had to go into sharecropping, where they would invite these ex-slaves in to basically work without pay. And they would get like a share of the profits. So later on, it became more difficult, because then they had to find another systemic way of basically squeezing our balls. Oh, sorry, can I use that term?
I think you can. Yeah. Not to mention they got reparations, but we did not.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so
what I'm saying is that I made a long preamble to say that there's still lots of systemic issues that are ingrained in us. Tao spoke to a lot of them. So what we have to do is detabouize a lot of the conversations that we have and really speak openly about our feelings, speak openly about race, speak openly about classism, and colorism that goes on here more than racism. So once we start having those open and frank discussions, we're going to move forward.
Okay, Tau, I give you probably 10 seconds to wrap up. Somebody on Facebook is asking for part 2 already.
Two people.
Two persons asking for part 2.
Yeah.
So Tau, 10 seconds to wrap up, and then we have the video.
Connect to the argument, the new thing is all Black Lives Matter, right? So then that encompasses, as Garfield said, that encompasses a lot of the groups that were typically ignored. And actually the founders of the movements have about including, you know, gay women, gay men, like all of this is blackness also. So that'll lead us in another direction, and maybe we'll pick it up another time. Looking forward to that.
It was a pleasure. It's an honor having you on board. I want to thank Naima as well for being here, and Dr. Garfield, I want to thank you as well. We're going to close out. See you next time, and we're going to close out with a video showing solidarity for Black Lives Matter throughout the world. Thank you. Good night. Have a safe week.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.